Ooh, okay. So I feel like music history was just made recently because I read that Tory Lanez sold his new album as an NFT. So there was million copies sold for $1 each, and so people will just resell his album. This confuses me because now I feel like I don't know anything about NFTs because this is not exactly the same album, but a million copies, I don't know. But, here we go. So we're really rolling into the NFT world and seeing how that goes. But anyways, of course, this is the HackerNoon Podcast, and my name is Amy Tom. Thank you very much for joining. Today on the podcast, we have Mike Vittiglio, who is the Success and Solutions Engineer at LaunchDarkly. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
HackerNoon Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. It's a pleasure.
I am excited to chat with you today because I want to ask you some questions about game development because your background is in game dev. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you previously worked at Agora, which then became WB Games, right? And
Correct.
So your background is in game dev. So, okay, I have some questions about how this really works because I want to understand, what is the gaming industry like? Because I've never worked in the gaming industry and I'm not a developer. So what is it like to actually work in the gaming industry?
Sure. So that question is a short question with a lot of nuance on the answers, but I'll try my best to... and unfortunately, it's going to sound like a cop-out, but it's the truth. It really depends on where you are in your life as well as what company you join. I have, for example, one dear friend of mine who lives very close to me, was completely indie and lived in a treehouse with an extension cord coming from his friend's place where he and his wife lived, where they worked on a game by themselves, bottom to top. They learned everything from scratch.
Whoa.
They were really successful with it.
What city was this in?
It was in, I believe it was in someplace upstate, but I don't want to give too much away. It's kind of stuff that he shared with me during the development process. But
cool.
And so I would say certainly some very indie game movie style, origin story stuff, really gritty kind of stuff. But then you work at other organizations. I have some friends who wound up working at places like EA or big label, insert label here, and life is good, but it becomes this very kind of grindy, just I work on weapons. So every day I come in, I get my tickets in, I fill out stuff. And so depending on what you're into, the game industry could be very grueling and painful. And if you find the right job at the right place, it could be just coasting and very easy. The one thing that I'd say is very prevalent throughout, for the most part, though, is the level of pressure and anxiety with regards to how is this title going to turn out. The deadline is always there. It's as much as some larger teams can say, nope, it's coming out when it's ready. Like Nintendo can pull that off. Shigeru Miyamoto will say, nope, not ready. But for a lot of the devs down on the ground, it's like, nope, I guess I'm not going to spend time over the winter holiday with my family. I got to, fix this patch and get it out there as soon as possible. So ultimately, what I recommend to anyone is, this day and age is a time where you could really learn to teach yourself whatever you want in terms of technology stuff. So if you're like, oh, I want to write video games, don't just jump and get your loan and go to Full Sail like I did. It worked out for me, but I've seen a lot of people where they just didn't understand. They were just 18 years old and taking out this massive loan. It's like, look, go online. Now you can. We couldn't then. But now go online, pick up an engine, whether it's Unity or Unreal or both or whatever. Take a couple of tutorial classes, get to the end and say, do I like this? And if you like it, great. And if not, good news, there's so many disciplines in game development as well that I honestly feel like it's something we should be teaching in high school because no other discipline requires audio. We need audio. Well, I guess we need a Foley artist, a music artist, whatever. There's music, psychology, marketing, you name it. There's so many ways, and all of it under an umbrella of teamwork. People multidisciplined, working in close quarters, making things happen. I mean, I find it in colleges, it's kind of like, all right, they're taking their CS degree and just putting they're just painting with this brush of, oh yeah, you're going to make games. And it's just CS. It's not really game design. But in a school environment, a high school environment, it's actually the reverse. You can get young kids into stuff like calculus. I learned calculus in 1990 something. And now, when I went back to Full Sail and I was learning, I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to figure out how light, what value of light it's going to, things have changed since, but back then doing basic shaders and stuff, it's like, oh, this is how I figure out what color to light this in the right lighting or which direction the vehicle should go. It all had a purpose thanks to framing it in the game development kind of setup.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, long answer, but I kind of answered it, I think.
Yes, definitely. So give me some context about when you worked in the gaming industry and for how long.
Sure. So I graduated out of Full Sail in 2008 and then found myself having my first, like I was still trying to work with my buddies. I worked at the school for a little bit, worked with some buddies offline, trying to get various projects off the ground while trying to find employment. There was a big recession back then. I finally got to work officially for a game company with a studio called Chaos Studios. They're now gone. Worked for THQ. They were part of THQ anyway, on a title called Homefront, where I worked in QA. And that was a lot of great fun, but one of the first lessons in terms of, again, what I was saying earlier, where you are in life and what you're doing. Back then, I had no real, I want to start a family kind of stuff. I was like, I just want to be in here. I just want to be a part of this. And so I didn't care if I wasn't developing. Fine, I'll test the game out. I'll start writing scripts to test. And it seemed like there was potential, but as we both know, at the end of Homefront, THQ and, well, Chaos first, and then THQ eventually just kind of disappeared. And I wound up doing machine vision for a bit. After that, though, I got a chance, after about a year and a half, I got an opportunity to work at a company called, at the time, Wireless Generation, now Amplify Education, I think is what's called, doing educational games in Unity. And that's where I really got to start really doing gamey kind of stuff. It's interactive entertainment, in my opinion. Games are kind of a weird anachronism, but I saw a lot of potential for education, and I was really excited to be a part of it. And we worked on these different simulations for students to understand stuff from a variety of different perspectives. I'm not sure how much I could share because some of it was under contract, but it was a lot of fun starting a team, getting people together, working with developers every day, just crunching out, trying to make something fun and educational at the same time in the mobile space as well was really super cool. After that, I kind of floated around again just because I had my first daughter, my first child, my daughter Zelda, and so I went back into just working regular humdrum development wherever I could find it. And then I landed eventually at Agora, where I got to work on some of their, Agora works kind of like the company provides service to other games. So I got to work on some of the back-end services for some of the titles that they were pumping out at the time. Pretty sure I could say I worked on Zoom 2016 to some degree. I'm in the credits anyway, and certainly put a lot of my blood, sweat, and tears into it for sure. And it was a great time. Let me tell you, the team at Agora, now WB Games, were some of the gold standard. I would normally join teams and feel like there were some things I knew better, some things that I didn't. When I got to Agora, I was surrounded by brilliant people who, frankly, gave me the worst case of what do they call it? Imposter syndrome ever. Because everyone was just so sharp and really knew everything that they were doing. And I really got to learn quite a lot, made a lot of friends there, and look back on it rather fondly, honestly, in a lot of regards.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the gaming industry then, and the pressure of the industry. Because I imagine that the pressure of the industry is almost like this cooker for building really good relationships with your coworkers because they go through the same shit as you.
Up and down. I'd say that it's like any other high pressure scenario. There are some people who can't handle their, you know what? I can't even say some people. Depending on the scenario, even I can have a short temper and not be tolerant of someone's lack of capacity. There's also a tendency for a lot of individuals to say, you know what, I don't want anyone to realize I am not good at this, so I'm going to keep on putting as much pressure on myself to make sure I succeed, and then I can be a part of the club. And and I fell for that too. The pressure is serious because you want to prove yourself. You want people to believe in you as much as you believe in yourself. Sometimes you start to not believe in yourself, especially for some of the younger folks who might find themselves without people around them to kind of not egg them on. What's the word I'm looking for? Really kind of support them, show them yo, you got this, man. It's good. If they don't have a good sense of self, a good sense of self-esteem, it's easy for it to start whittling down, and then you start to believe in the lies that you're telling yourself. I don't belong here. This isn't right or whatever. I was really lucky. I had a great person that I became friends with, a couple actually. I don't want to start singling anyone out, but I'd say my buddy Graylin over at WB Games. Now he's still there at WB Games. We still talk to this day. He's a really great guy, and there were a lot of times I was in the middle of a fire, and he really helped me out. And then a buddy of mine who passed away recently, Andrew. He was just we'd go out and have beers and talk about life and stuff like that. So again, depends on where you are. I hope everyone that goes into wherever you're working, but especially in the game industry, can find those buddies to remind you no, it's okay. That's just how they talk. They're not, so-and-so isn't a jerk. it's just they're under a lot of pressure, or don't worry, you're doing fine. You just don't see how much you're actually trying to pull off. So, but the pressure's there because, as I mentioned before, the game's got to release, contracts need to be handled, and that's just the nature of business. And frankly, compared to any other business, the game industry is inherently gambling because unlike any other industry outside of entertainment, in any entertainment industry, I should say, it's all a crapshoot. You can have the most polished album, put so much money into it, and then the artist doesn't sell a single copy. Meanwhile, the one that they made with the 4-track in their garage was like the breakthrough. Same thing with games. You know, when I look at one of my favorite games from like 10 years ago, it was like XCOM. They did a reboot of XCOM. I was a fan of it growing up in high school. So when I saw that it was coming out on tablets and it was like I was like, this game's going to be great. It did fine, but it didn't blow the doors open. It wasn't like, you know, it didn't shatter records or anything. It's like, yeah, it looks whatever. Good job. Meanwhile, you take a game like Minecraft, which was like effectively like a 4chan-y kind of like, you know, cube world rehash that was kind of like just a crapshoot. And it turned into this amazing thing. No one can really that. I think they bought it for like $4 billion or something like that.
Whoa, I didn't know that. Holy.
I mean, look, check. I'm sure it was with a B. Maybe it was 2 billion, but either way, all I'm saying is that like it's a crapshoot. And so basically from a business standpoint, if my margins are in such a variable state, you're going to squeeze as much as possible your employees and try to get the most out of them, which can generate a lot of negative kind of bad mojo, you know, bad people practices. Work-life balance suddenly becomes like we said that when it was nice. Now we got to release it next week. Keep working kind of stuff. But that's not unique to the game industry. I'm sure people working for NASA have those days as well.
Yeah. So why is the gaming industry like this, where it's so high pressure? Is it because there are so many game developers, or is it because the deadlines are so tight, or something else?
A mixture of both, because game development is real-time development across multiple disciplines. And so trying to find someone who can develop on your team is, for one, you're probably going to be looking for someone very, very good who also has a passion for games. What I've discovered coming out of Full Sail is like, not everybody's into games growing up. Evidently, I'm like this relic of as my wife calls me sometimes, man-child. That's just, you know, like I just have a passion for the industry. And because of that, you know, there are people who are perfectionists, are going to work all day, all night. And it creates this sense of like, well, that's what we are then. We're going to be passionate and put everything into it. And if you ever want to take a break, you start to feel like you're kind of ripping off your cohorts, you know, like I shouldn't take a break. My buddy's still working. I got to keep working. But besides that, also, I know people now outside of the game industry who, as developers, are one-trick ponies and are very well compensated to just like, no, I write stuff for Salesforce. I write Salesforce code all day. That's it. And they get paid 6-figure salaries and get to call their hours and coast. But you go to the game industry and it's like, nope, now you're going to learn in this language to do this because technology keeps improving and we've got to keep up with the consoles and the latest and greatest and go, 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 go. So retention, like burnout, is a big thing because it's eventually you start saying, well, I want to spend time with my family. And my buddy gets to have a vacation and a regular 9 to 5, which becomes a dream once you start to get a little bit older. And well, for some people like the Cliff Blazinski. If you get high enough, actually, I'm pretty sure that the Cliff Blazinskis and all of the, you know, top notch. I'm showing my age. Like that, Cliff is the guy. Cliffy B was the guy who I grew up being like, I want to be like that guy. Yeah. Those folks get to that status and then they can kind of just chill and say like, this is what I want to do, because they're these like uber designers. But the further down that chain you go, the more it's like, yeah, I want to do gameplay code, but I'm just doing, you know, user-generated content storage and management and endpoint writing and stuff like that. It's not very game designy, but you're a part of it, you know? And it feels good in the end, but it is high pressure.
Right, yeah. So I want to ask about what kinds of resources actually go into developing a game. Like, I guess specifically in your experience, how many people are involved in producing a game?
Well, I would say, as I started with, some games take 2 people in a treehouse and doing their best. It really, the scope really varies on how big of a product. Like, for example, if you're going to go cell shaded and, you know, very few characters and it's more about the gameplay, doing something similar to like say Steven's Sausage Roll, I don't know if you ever heard of that game. Really cool puzzle game. Very hard, but very fair. Probably wouldn't take a lot of people. You just need you could probably even Fiverr your way through some of the graphic assets and such. And not a big deal. But once you're talking about like, no, we want to put it on multiple platforms and we're going to be using we're going to use the Unreal Engine. So some of the plugins may need to be customly written around it. And if now you're going to go console even more, that starts to really scale up. And so we could talk about hundreds of people working all the time. And then if you're really big enough, then you could start investing and the gambling gets even higher. Now your investors are talking millions of dollars. They want to see billions in sales. Well, they're going to want to see a QA department, and they're going to need a networking team. And let me tell you, the back-end resources to serve any kind of game nearly every game has an online presence. Even if you're not aware of it, behind the scenes, someone's storing your data regarding like, when you log in, what's your account, how much credits you may have, your save state, stuff like that. Someone's got to write that. The game will speak to some endpoint, but that endpoint has to be a computer running some software that will store and manage. And when you're talking the usage time, like when a game first releases, it spikes. Very rarely do you see a spike later in the life of the game. If anything, you're lucky because you can kind of grow with it. But oftentimes you're just kind of like sitting there waiting for like an earthquake. Like, here we go, release time. And you're looking at the clock and then the concurrent users numbers start to go up and those servers start to, if computers could make sound like a submarine underneath it would be like, and you could feel the pressure of your systems. You're looking at your memory usage, CPU, just hoping they stay up. So, wow. So again, sorry to not give a definitive answer, but the fact is because there's so many different organizations, so many different targets, different game types, it really could vary a lot.
Okay, but we're going from like 2 at a low end to like what is like hundreds. A high end, like hundreds. Okay.
Hundreds, maybe even thousands if you want to include contractors and stuff like that. And then people who would, another great little caveat is, oh no, we want to sell it in Japan, for example. And of course, and we want it to be in Japanese. We don't want to have them just, read in English. We want them to we want to localize it to that region, make it relevant. Maybe even changing some of the story content because turns out in this country, this is rather offensive. We can't talk about this. So we have to rewrite this part of the game. Becomes very similar to movies, in fact, in that regard. If you want to make an indie movie like Blair Witch Project style, well, get a camera, go out into the woods with your friends and make it up as you go. But if you want to, you want to make some Marvel Cinematic Universe like Endgame or Infinity War, you're going to see those credits for a while. You're going to need 2 end credit scenes.
Right.
You need a mid-credit scene.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Because I imagine, too, that, like, when you get up to these instances where you have hundreds and maybe even thousands of people working on one game, there's just so much to develop. There's so much to think about. How many months does this take?
Oh, years. You wouldn't even really talk in months. If you look at games like Destiny, for example, that's out there, Bungie has this MMO FPS RPG kind of thing. It's never really ending, strictly speaking. I guess that's part of the hard part too, is that you have product leads in product manager, people in charge of the overarching product saying like, look, yes, we did want to have a certain feature in there, but we can't do it. We have to release it by Christmas, cut it out kind of stuff. The definition of done is another one of those like enemies of doing great things. Because when you're a small skunkworks team doing whatever you got to do, and this is a passion project, it's not done until you're ready. But when you take a look at you have the option to go that route, I should say. Whereas when it's like, no, the decision makers are not even gamers, they're investors. They want to see their money back. The decision is all pretty much business. One goal, no soul. I'm sorry, I don't mean to. That sounds very negative on the decision makers, but it is business, and unfortunately,
it's the name of the game. Yeah.
You can't be like, but it's going to be great when it's done. They're like, dude, look, we're talking millions of dollars here. All right, is that going to really do it? And sacrifices are made. It's really sad, actually, when you see the games that really should have been one way and they turn out another, and you're like, that was a business decision that totally hobbled what could have been something great. But thankfully, we're just talking games. We're not talking like cancer research or anything like that. It's just, a crappy launch of whatever.
Yeah. So in this like development of the game and like all of the moving parts and all of the developers that are going into producing this, like how how is this organized?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, there's just so much going on. Like, how does it go from the start to the end? There just seems like there's so much.
Well, oftentimes what'll end up happening is, so let's just disregard the smaller company, the smaller skunkworks kind of little teams, because for them, it's really just people getting together, they come up with an idea, and then they work with what they got and they build it out, and that's fine. But with large AAA studios, oftentimes they already have IPs or teams who have created other IPs come out. Like, it's similar to, for example, and I have no inside information regarding the new WB game Back 4 Blood, for example, but it is the old studio that basically the same people who made Left 4 Dead. So that's an example of not an IP being bought, but you get a team and you're basically making a spiritual successor. Imagine picking up Team Ico's core creator folks and then having to make a Ico-esque game on the Xbox, for example. Not saying that that's going to happen. I would love to see it happen, but it'd be so you start with just like what can we sell? So they'll find a lot of the same thing Nintendo does all the time. Just, hey, people like Mario, another Mario, go. And it's not a whole lot of that's oftentimes why you see, if you want something different, you have to kind of fish out into the indie, like not AAA, but single A, as ACG made in one of his videos, talked about games that are just a little bit below that threshold, because those organizations are trying to basically put their money on something new and fresh. So like, I feel like it was a little bit more prevalent back like 10 years ago when we had kind of this explosion of indie kind of devs like Super Meat Boy, Braid, Fez, all of these like interesting ideas were starting to come out. And now we're kind of going back into this very kind of repetitive, samey kind of stuff. But eventually those numbers will start to not look as favorably, and maybe they'll invest into new ideas as well. But, it's just risky. You don't want to put a lot of money into something and for the love, like that just doesn't really happen.
Right. Yeah. And when you're dealing with like millions of dollars, the investors need to turn around. That makes sense. Yeah. And like,
oftentimes
that makes sense
they'll cut it short. They'll say, no, you know what? This isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. No one's going to like it. And they might be totally wrong. But, like, for example, when they made the team that made Portal, and this isn't firsthand knowledge, but, this is pretty well kind of known in some of the circles. The original sequel to Portal was going to have no portals in it. But when Valve went around talking to folks and said like, hey, so check out this new game, they were like, I want more Portal. And the irony, though, is that like, well, what got Portal to where it was at? For those who remember the orange box from like 2007, it was totally out of nowhere. I remember playing through all of Portal in like an evening after I came out of, I finished class and then played through it. Actually, I was in one of my first like team projects, and we're all playing the orange box. I beat it, heard that Jonathan Colton song, It's Still Alive, like this was a triumph. And I was like, oh my God, they're talking to me. This is amazing. This is an amazing game. And it was amazing because it came out of nowhere. Like no one knew that this product was coming out and it was going to do it. But the irony is that once you see that something works, you're reluctant to try something new. And the irony, though, is that what got you to be familiar was when it was new. So it's and again, adds yet another layer of risk for the big players, because now they've got a very important IP that all the fans love, but the team behind it wants to do something totally different. It's I think kind of like when you see authors decide to write books under a pseudonym because they're like, if I got to write one more book like the last one, I'm done. So
and
game studios don't get that liberty.
Yeah. How much does the operations cost? Like, how much does it cost to produce a game? I have no idea. I mean, I can't give any specifics on any particular game, but if we're talking AAA, it goes well into the like easily tens, if not hundreds of millions. And if the game is ongoing, like it's gonna have an online presence, infrastructure is expensive. Like environments where you are like, so when I was talking before about like you get a QA team, for example, and now you've got like, imagine you're this team, you're making this first person shooter, your designers and your developers are working, they make like a gun shoot a certain way and the gameplay works a certain way. Great. Okay. So how do we know if it's fun? Well, you hand it to a bunch of testers to sit down and play with it. And if you're really big, you're going to have multiple teams of testers all playing. Now, what is this all being hosted on? Well, you have to have an environment similar to like what the people are using in production for your QA team, quality assurance. Right. And then on top of that, you may have another piece of infrastructure, like what they call staging, that acts as like this intermediary. It's kind of like a dress rehearsal for releasing into production. Those machines that they put up to make this happen easily can go for like thousands upon thousands a day. Oof. I mean, we're talking hardware that is just massive drives, massive amounts of stuff. Yeah. And
and they're necessary in order, like, you could build them yourself if you wanted to, but goodness gracious, what we've learned, thankfully, as an industry is like, as much as I'm loath to see, like, I don't like seeing big companies just taking over an environment, but the guilty pleasure of it is that they're very convenient. And I couldn't even imagine how much more expensive it could have been if people were still just like, yeah, we just ordered a bunch of Dell boxes and then we're going to have, a team of IT people build each and every single one of them. And maybe by the end of the week or two, we can have it ready to try. Instead, go to AWS, clickety clack. You can even run a Terraform script, spin up. The build's going to be big, but in terms of turnaround time, it's much more instantaneous.
Yeah. Okay.
And expensive, but equally expensive.
So can you help me understand how environments actually work? So, like, the idea of having multiple different environments, like, if we were to go back to an example you said, like developing a different storyline for the Japanese game versus the American game, is that going to be another environment? Like, is that how that works?
Not really, no. And that's more of just like making a specific build. Well, the way it is now, I mean, when a day comes where I think other technologies become more prevalent in the industry, like feature flags and stuff like that, maybe we can rely on that tech to do it. But usually it's just a different build or some internal, like, it maps to one file or another to generate. It can be more complicated, depends on the scenario. But excuse me. What an environment is try to imagine, like, if I'm going to use a metaphor here for like a race car. You got a team, you have these engineers working on this race car, and they're inside this like very big, not a clean room, but it's like this one giant garage where they have all these tools and they're working on it. And maybe like a little tiny circular track where they can at least like turn it on and go around a circle. That's the dev environment. And then you've got a QA environment where they actually have this inside track that's similar. Like, it has all the major turns that you would see, but it's not like any particular racetrack. And then you have the QA team sitting in the car, driving it around, letting you know, like giving it a test run, saying, hey, looks like, we got a bad suspension on this turn. Maybe we should, whatever. They report back to the dev team, say, hey, whatever, fix that. Then staging would be kind of like a facsimile of the next big race where like a certain, like you can expect to try to test it against what's going to really happen out there. And then production is the actual race itself. So as you could imagine, all of these different, like, the closer you get to production, the more expensive and frankly more numerous these kind of dummy environments whose jobs is to satisfy to give a level of confidence to the team. Like, yes, it's ready for prime time. They're still extremely expensive, but that level of confidence, it's better to never need to ask for forgiveness, because we're in a fickle world. In the game industry, again, because games are not a necessity, if someone is like, I have since dropped out of Destiny because of some design choices they've made that simply are incompatible, or I've changed so much that their design decisions are no longer compatible with me. So they've lost me. So in that same regard, like, if you want to do whatever you can to make sure you don't lose that prospective customer. And for me, it was personal. Thankfully, it was my decision to, kind of get back some time in my life. But if you, for example, put out a patch, actually, it's very similar to what happened in Destiny. I remember at one point, Destiny 2 had come out and they had changed some of the drop methodologies. So people were getting more stuff all the time. They were getting more loot drops everywhere. And it kind of over time, at first it was super exciting because it never happened. But then eventually you're like, well, now I got all the things. I don't really care to play. And that kind of mistake is like, well, how do we fix that? And, again, you don't want to have to get there. You would rather never get to that position. Now, granted, that's more of a design choice, and that's not, it's a little tricky to kind of anticipate right away when that happens. But regardless, you're still bound to the deploy process and whatever. The last thing you want to do is accidentally put out an update and it wipes out people's user credits or like all your progress. I was playing a game. I won't name it because I don't want to. It's a great game and I don't want to disparage the team. But I played it on my Xbox and I was getting some really on my Xbox Series X. I was really happy. I unlocked a certain number of weapons. It felt great, and then I realized that the save goes across to like my Windows machine. So I played on my Windows machine and it wasn't there. And I was like, oh, that's weird. I don't see any of my guns. So I went back down to the Series X to get all my get all my goodies and whatever. And it overwrote my save with the save from Windows and I lost everything. And I was like, well, now I don't even care anymore. Like all 40 hours of my time have been wasted. fair enough.
Yeah.
And out I go. That's like a level of problem that maybe they can't save my time, but if they can see that and then address it sooner than later, it saves them from having the pain of like, well, until that release happens. And then that's where the pressure comes back in. Like now some developer out there has to identify the problem, fix it, do a rollout. And because they can't control that state of the software until a new release goes out, the pain lives on. The fire continues.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So yeah, there's just so much going on with the release and like so many different ways that it could go wrong.
I'm sorry, I can't give you.
I feel the pressure
answer.
now. I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah, honestly, it was a big part of one of the release I had leaving leaving gaming in general. It's not really behind me, but it's more of a hobby now for fun. I like doing it. I still feel very passionate with it, but it was such a relief to think like I can just say, look, I'm going to take the week in between Christmas and New Year's off, and not have to be like, well, but or It's like, no, yeah, no one works around that time. Why would you even ask?
Mm-hmm.
Don't even take the time. Just it'll be quiet days, and game industry, most of the time, holidays are just as scary as anything else. Because if something does go awry and no one's around, it's rough.
Right.
It's rough. And I tip my hat to all of them.
When did you get out of the gaming industry?
Around, I'd say 4 years ago, I think. About 4 years back, I walked away from it. I don't know, just you get to a point where like I was commuting quite a bit and just kind of lost that love and feeling, like I was just like, I got into this to make my dreams, to make my games and stuff. And it was good enough for a while to just work on other people's, like, oh, I got to work on Doom and it's like, yeah, but there was still so many things I wanted to make that I just wasn't gonna, it just wasn't gonna happen. And I've come to terms with that. Maybe one day I'll land on $1 million or something and try to make those dreams happen. But in the end, I would rather spend time with my daughter and child, my son and my whole family. How about that? Just spending time with the kids and relaxing. And the working from home thing really worked out to my benefit. I hope that the industry overall after COVID, people start to realize like work from home is actually a very viable and robust and resilient kind of model. It does take a different discipline, but it gives people so much more time and flexibility, as well as helping to kind of resuscitate a lot of the small towns around America. Like I live in a small town in upstate New York, and I get to bring an extra income into here that frankly, like you wouldn't find a local business offering, but a company in San Francisco thinks that I'm the cheapest thing that they've got on staff. So I shouldn't have said that out loud.
You're fine. And when did you start working at LaunchDarkly?
So LaunchDarkly came up after I left WB Games, an offer from a dear friend of mine. He's not old, or he's as old as me, I think. Dan Papandrea. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be? There's this great company called Sysdig. Would you want to come check it out?" And I was thinking, I'll try out. I want to learn some new stuff. This container stuff seems neat, and I really wasn't getting a lot of time to look into that where I was. So I went and worked over there doing support. But things got a little bit, as time went on, I just really wasn't as into it as much. Basically, what happened was a recruiter reached out to me and said, "Hey, you should check this out." And what sold me the most on was that it was so weird. I looked at LaunchDarkly and I was like, okay, so it's like a Boolean, but it's online. I don't get it. And then as I was kind of, just running, I was making a basic app to use the platform just to check it out. I realized that was the answer to a lot of the fires that had occurred in my past. There were situations where I remember I'm going to say, I could say one, but it could be at any of my old anywhere in my past lives. There are situations where the fire went off and all we had to do was just turn off what was going wrong. But in software, there's no real valve to turn off. All you could do is redeploy, restart, or, get people up. And when I saw that, I was like, wait a second, if implemented in all of those problems, I could have been spared from being woken up in the middle of the night or having to have, ruin an entire holiday weekend because someone deployed something that no one wanted, And that's when I was like, this is great. This is amazing. And then on top of that, they were saying, yeah, we're looking for a solutions engineer. I was like, so wait, so I don't even have to support anything. I just have to tell people this stuff's awesome. That's easy. Okay. I already think it's awesome, so I'll do it. And that's how I wound up at LaunchDarkly. Lev Lazinski, the one who hired me, and Steve Glass have been the ones who got me in. And one thing I love about working here, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit off topic, but it bears saying, it's like I felt so appreciated and like like a part of something. And it was, and it's amazing how it's kind of like that scene in The Office. I don't know if you've watched it, but there's this one where the accounting team is like, they're upset because they're not getting a cut of the commission from the sales team, they find out. And then they decide to have this like big meeting to talk about negotiating how they're going to split up the commission. And they have this whole spread out. And then the accounting team comes in. It's like, this is all we wanted. We just wanted, the spread. And then like they realize like, oh, we don't have to offer them anything. We just got to make them feel happy. And that's like, it really speaks volumes, honestly. It's the same thing that happened to me. It's like LaunchDarkly, something I believe in. I really appreciate everything about the platform and what it's going to do it transformatively to workflows and such. But to also be at a place where I sincerely felt like I was a part of something. Like, well, what do you think, Mike? And I was like, yeah, I think it's great. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Wait, okay. So if there are any business owners out here listening to this that are like, why does he believe in this so much, or why does he love this so much? Like what was it about what they did that made you so happy?
Whenever I would try to contribute an idea, I didn't feel like I was swimming upstream. There were times where I would try to get people and organizations to do things as simple as like adopting a Git strategy that is now commonplace today. At 3 different organizations, I tried to say like, look guys, I read the manual and we're all using either they were using SVN and we're stuck in it, or we're using Git, but weren't using branches. That was a thing at least one place. And I'd get shot down. And I oftentimes would feel kind of like, well, now that you put yourself out there, we're going to make it sound like you're that goody good guy that's trying to make everybody do things their way. When I'm like, look, I'm just trying to be helpful. And instead I would just kind of crawl into my shell and then eventually just give up. Like, I don't really want to, every time I talk, I feel like I have now like the scarlet letter,
Yeah.
So we'll come into LaunchDarkly. I started, saying like, hey, what if I made a SDK plugin for Unity engine or the Unreal game engine? And they were like, that would be amazing. Can you do that? And I'm like, no debate, no fight. I could just do it. And that's how actually I wrote I wound up writing the Unreal engine Unity plugin for the client, and then also the Unity counterpart, and just finished making a game for it, actually, a game called Launch. Now we're working on some other stuff. Not really getting that, like, it's a big explorative thing. It's kind of just me and a lot of great volunteers helping me out along the way. But to definitely be good to the people that you've meet in your life, because the people in my one of the people that came out of the woodwork to help with that game that I was working on, Launch, a Lunar Lander clone, was an old friend from Full Sails. He was in the audio thing. He went for audio production. Great guy, Dean Kraseski. And so I reached out to him. I was like, dude, he lived right around the corner from me. I was like, dude, are you still doing music? He's like, yeah, man. And I said, here, can you make this? And he's like, all right. In 2 weeks, he gave me a couple of tracks and my game had music. Yeah. So again, good to have a diverse set of friends and discipline, because it makes things easier.
Yep, definitely.
And fun.
One of the articles that just got submitted to HackerNoon that I edited the other day, he gave some advice, and it was make more friends with lawyers. And I was like, yeah, that's nice. That's nice advice.
Like, again, talk about multidiscipline in terms of intellectual property law and other legal stuff. Yeah, having a lawyer handy, because I'm a developer. Like, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I'm a pretty smart dude. I could figure stuff out. And when I look at legals, I tried to start a nonprofit about a year ago, and it totally floundered. If it wasn't for this pro bono lawyer that's been helping me through this, and even he was like, I don't know how you would have gotten out of this how they could have expected anyone like just yourself to figure your way through this.
Right.
We're almost out of it now. So yeah, definitely, like, never look at someone and be like, well, they're not relevant to me, because they can provide insights that you couldn't even begin to imagine. I mean, think about how most of the game industry got sideswiped when Nintendo released the least powerful console, the Wii, and managed to trounce on like the 360 and the PS3, which was still kind of lagging behind anyway, because they just kind of found this like, we're going to befriend the old ladies who want to play tennis in their living room with their grandkids. It's keep your team diverse and in good spirits.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Amazing. Well, Mike, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. If we want to find you and what you're working on online, where can we look?
Sure. All my work is primarily for is with LaunchDarkly, as I kind of alluded to earlier, where I'm working on these interactive kind of demos for them, but also, evangelizing and helping to sell the product to would-be consumers. So, if you want to see what we're up to, feel free to check us out at launchdarkly.com. We have a great blog, ongoing blog there as well, and a lot of great information. So,
perfect. Thank you very much, Mike.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Amy.
If you like this episode of the HackerNoon Podcast, don't forget to like it, share it, subscribe to it, and you can find us online at HackerNoon on all these socials. This episode was produced by HackerNoon, hosted by me, Amy Tom, and edited by your lovely audio wizard, Alex. Stay weird, and I'll see you on the internet. Bye-bye.
HackerNoon Podcast.